This episode of the UAE Tech Podcast is sponsored by Kaspersky. Kaspersky is offering our listeners a discount using the promo code ALBAWEBA that can be used on any of Kaspersky's consumer products on kas.pr/ALBAWEBA. One more time, that's kas.pr/ALBAWEBA. This episode was recorded with the generous support of the podcast studio at the Rove Hotel in downtown Dubai. From our offices in Media City, Dubai, this is the UAE Tech Podcast, a product of the ALBAWEBA Group. Podcast sponsors receive EDM promotion, distribution across all major podcast networks, and publication on ALBAWEBA Business. Gold and silver sponsors receive a 6-month Pro Plus account on Signal Presswire. Go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/sponsor UAE Tech Podcast for more information.
Businesses and individuals, they started to realize that as much as technology is involved in our lives, security has to go with that. We cannot keep developing and expanding the reach of technology into all aspects of lives and businesses and economy without securing these technologies and systems. One thing that demonstrate the importance of cybersecurity in that regard is it's hardly now we can separate the interaction between the cyber world and the physical world. All the ongoings in the cyber world have direct impact and implications on the physical world, especially when we look at the IoT industry, the connected devices, smart cities. Now, the technology doesn't have only an impact on financial side of the economy, but also it could have physical or brings physical damage to the society, could harm people, could make us lose lives even. When you think of the healthcare system, for example, they now use they have digitized almost all the tools and equipment they use in the healthcare industry. And if we can imagine anything goes wrong with these systems in the cyber world, in the digital part of it, it will have direct impact on lives, on people, on the physical world. So the bottom line is that we hardly can separate the digital and physical world, and that obviously demonstrate the importance and the value that cybersecurity brings to economies, to societies, and the role it plays in keeping economies and societies developing as we go.
Over the past 12 to 18 months, digitalisation has accelerated across the world economy and, because of COVID-19, in much of our daily lives. Our kids are now taught on digital devices. Online entertainment from gaming to movies is booming, and we're turning to cyberspace for our health, to keep in touch with our family, to order food or pay the bills. Here in the UAE, we interact with government over cloud-based apps and services. All of this suggests an important and overlooked question. During this historical transition, how vulnerable are we? Is this cybernetic horizon really secure? As digital colonizes the physical, the range of cybercrime and cybersecurity opportunities are exponentially growing. At the same time, the depth and sophistication of cybersecurity operations is racing to keep up. Today we're talking to Emad Haffar, Head of Technical Experts at Kaspersky Cybersecurity Middle East. Emad has managed large cybersecurity projects across the Middle East, Turkey, and Africa. From machine learning pattern recognition to analyst-driven intelligence and especially developed iOS for the Internet of Things, Emad provides a comprehensive introduction to the new threat environments consumers, businesses, and governments are now facing. Today we're talking to Emad Haffar, Head of Technical Experts Middle East, Turkey, and Africa at Kaspersky Middle East. Emad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, John.
So, To begin with, could you give us a short introduction to your role at Kaspersky and also the role of Kaspersky cybersecurity in the Middle East and GCC more generally?
Right. So I started with Kaspersky probably 11 years ago. I joined as a pre-sale engineer working with enterprise clients, and then moved into security architect and security consultant, all the way to where I am right now, heading the team of technical experts and security consultants in Middle East, Turkey, and Africa. So large part of what my team and I do is talking to our enterprise client to try and understand their cybersecurity challenges and their requirements, their vision and strategies for the coming years, and then try to see how we as Kaspersky can help them to achieve this vision, to achieve their goals, and probably even to overcome any of the challenges they have in the domain of cybersecurity. Personally, I spend a big chunk of my time doing the same, talking to our strategic clients in the region, in addition to managing the team, of course, to set up with them long-term plans in terms of how we can help them expand their capacity in the cybersecurity domain, and how we as Kaspersky can help them with our experience, with our technologies, with our products and solutions to once again better defend their networks and digital assets and establish a robust cybersecurity strategy.
So for those who aren't too familiar with the cybersecurity industry, particularly in the Middle East, how have things changed over the past 11 years since you first started? I suppose that's the first question. And the second is, in your view, what is the position of Kaspersky within the wider industry here in the region?
Right. So definitely cybersecurity is one of these domains that is constantly changing. So thinking back 11 years ago, it was completely different than what it is right now. Things are totally different than the way it was. And obviously this is in part because the technology is evolving, the tools and the systems and the even technologies that enterprises and clients use are totally different than even 5 years ago, not 10 or 11 years ago. So the cybersecurity has to evolve with the evolvement of the technology to keep pace with it and to be able to provide the protection and to defend these systems and technologies as they progress. And the more they get involved in our daily lives and in our businesses and government services and all the other parts of life. Now, when it comes to Kaspersky role in the cybersecurity domain, especially in the region, today Kaspersky globally is a leader in the cybersecurity domain. We provide cybersecurity solutions, services, and experience as well to our clients globally. We employ a large team of technical experts and highly skilled individuals who work with us to achieve that objective, try and eliminate the risks surrounding our customers and clients globally, and of course understanding their requirements, understanding their needs and challenges, and then see how we can help in that regard.
So one of the things we focus on at the UAE Tech Podcast is global case studies out of the Middle East. And I think sometimes when talking about the technology industry in particular, certainly from my own experience and background, cybersecurity sometimes, at least in the mainstream, isn't something that's already spoken about. And yet in the UAE, it's a very big and important sector. And I personally saw this at GTEX, which is the main technology event for our listeners outside the UAE. And there was a vast hall devoted to various elements of cybersecurity. So it's clearly of great strategic interest to this country and of strategic interest to the economy. And I suppose, as the economy becomes more digital, as so much more of our lives moves online, is this a trend where cybersecurity isn't just becoming an institutional or government application, but is something that is increasingly becoming a background service into many of the applications that serve our everyday lives and basic aspects of the economy.
You're absolutely right, John. I mean, if we look at the changes that cybersecurity went through, especially recently, in the recent few years, now in UAE we have a part of the cabinet responsible of the country cybersecurity, and the role of cybersecurity or CIOs or CISOs in any organization is has never been more essential than these days. Now, obviously, this is because businesses and individuals, they started to realize that as much as technology is involved in our lives, security has to go with that. We cannot keep developing and expanding the reach of technology into all aspects of lives and businesses and economy without securing these technologies and systems. One thing that demonstrate the importance of cybersecurity in that regard is it's hardly now we can separate the interaction between the cyber world and the physical world. All the ongoings in the cyber world have direct impact and implications on the physical world, especially when we look at the IoT industry, the connected devices, smart cities. Now, the technology doesn't have only an impact on financial side of the economy, but also it could have physical or brings physical damage to the society, could harm people, could make us lose lives even. When you think of the healthcare system, for example, they now use, they have digitized almost all the tools and equipment they use in the healthcare industry. And if we can imagine anything goes wrong with these systems in the cyber world, in the digital part of it, it will have direct impact on lives, on people, on the physical world. So the bottom line is that we hardly can separate the digital and physical world, and that obviously demonstrate the importance and the value that cybersecurity brings to economies, to societies, and the role it plays in keeping economies and societies developing as we go.
I think that's a really fascinating insight, and it might even be something that hasn't been written about enough. I remember reading this great observation, which was that digital is colonizing the physical.
Right.
So that it's almost like a reverse process. Digital, particularly through IoT or Internet of Things, which you mentioned, is moving into our physical lives in a way which is unprecedented. And that is having all sorts of shifts. But one of these is the question of digital security suddenly becomes, far more important, far more of relevance, because the stakes are so much higher, as you mentioned. So I thought one thing we could do today, because this is such a kind of fascinating topic that gives insights into so many other aspects of the economy, is try and break down what cybersecurity is in 2021 and where it might be heading, from a B2C to a B2B to even a government layer, because they all seem to have different priorities and different sensitivities. So just from my own perspective as a consumer, when I think of cybersecurity, 5 years ago it probably wasn't something in the back of my mind, but increasingly, one thing is Kaspersky produces very good content, very interesting press releases on studies of global trends, and I remember reading one on a video game called Cyberpunk 2077, which is incredibly popular, and it had a statistic, something like 3,300 scams or malware attacks just for this one product had been detected. And then there's also very interesting data on e-commerce, which is rapidly becoming one of the core sectors of the UAE economy, as well as fintech, as well as, in the future, probably things like driverless cars and things like that. So should consumers, in your view, start paying a little bit more attention to this?
Absolutely, because look, technology now isn't a thing that only large enterprises or governments are using. It's something that all of us, whether or not we know it, involve in every aspect of our life. I mean, take a typical household. Here in UAE, for example, you'll find a lot of devices that are what we call smart devices, smart TVs, fridges, baby monitors, maybe monitor cameras, even smart watches, not to mention mobile devices, laptops, and so on. A lot of what we do every day depends on these devices and the technologies behind them. And obviously, one important aspect of all these devices that they are all connected to some network somewhere. So if it's not the Wi-Fi I have at home, probably it will be the 5G network potentially, or any other form of connectivity. Now, while this is very convenient, it brings a lot of benefit to us, and it facilitates a lot of the things that we do and want to do. At the same time, the fact of the matter is that this connectivity and these technologies would definitely bring in a new host of threats that we've never thought of before, especially when we talk about home consumers, home users, because usually they're not very concerned with the threats that are after their accounts or the threats that they're after their devices. But having these equipments constantly connected and constantly communicating with the internet means that they are exposed to threats that may not necessarily exist today, probably tomorrow or the day after. So it's quite essential to build with the not only company employees, with the average home user, a certain level of let's call it awareness, cybersecurity awareness. So at least they are aware what potentially could go wrong. And I'm not talking here about anything technical. I don't want to scare those who are not really tech savvy. But it's the basic level of understanding of what these devices and technologies are capable of doing, what could potentially go wrong. One thing that shocks me every time is that people, they don't really understand the value of their data, for example. For them, it's simply an email address. It's just a piece of information here and there. But all this has value, and there are a lot of even organized groups trying to go after this information and try to collect and harvest this information, because simply they know how to convert this information into monetary value. So unless we understand the value of the data, the threats that potentially could hit our equipment and our devices and all the smart devices we have at home, anything that we use really, unknowingly, we are putting ourselves and our families and our kids at risk. I mean, look at cyberbullying, for example. It's something that any kid potentially could be in that situation. And it is a fact that our kids are constantly on their devices, their tablets, their phones, and online. So the chances of them being in that situation is quite likely. And unless we educate ourselves first about that, cyberbullying, that thing, and then educate our kids as well, how to deal with that situation, how to react to it, what to do when they are in a bad situation. Should they talk to us or to someone else? At least to give them the guidance, what they have to do. Now, all that can relate to the topic of awareness. And probably a few years ago, it was something, it was kind of a luxury. If you're aware of these threats, if you know what's going on, well, you have extra information than the average person. But today, I think this is the bare minimum. People need to educate themselves even a little about these threats, simply because we are all exposed to them constantly, and we never know when we might fall a victim to one of these threats. And in that situation, we need to know how to react. We need to know what to do. We need to prepare ourselves ahead of time to try and minimize the chances of this happening.
Well, thank you for that summary of the consumer space. And what's interesting is that when you talk about this, we're not merely talking about cybersecurity in terms of traditional security or economics. We're also talking about social implications.
Correct.
And that is quite a new discussion. And that's definitely, one we'd be interested in taking further in the future. So in the B2C space, for larger organizations or for businesses, what do you think are the key challenges or the key things some of the clients you work with are looking for? How are they, interested in protecting their networks when they come to a company like Kaspersky? What are their key priorities? And I suppose, secondly, what do you believe are the key growth areas in that space in the future?
Well, definitely one thing that almost all organizations have in common is the idea of how they can keep up with the pace at which cybercrime or cyber threats are evolving. One statistic that we have at Kaspersky is the number of unique malicious codes that we see every single day for the past probably 3 years. That was, or still is, more than 360,000 unique malicious code every single day. To put this in simple terms, this could be looked at a 360,000 new variant of old malwares that we spot and detect every day for the past, this is the number for the past few years. Before that, it was 350 and so on. And this is Kaspersky alone, right? So in total, there is a huge increase in the number of malicious code. And it's not only the quantity of the codes, malicious codes, but also the sophistication of the cyber attacks, the kind of tools, the kinds of techniques and tactics that are being employed in cyber attacks to go after businesses and organizations of all sizes. And of course, the cyber criminals, they have no shortage of new ways and techniques to pull out a new campaign or a new method of trying to penetrate into any network. For example, we've seen attacks on supply chain. Now this is a very well-known kind of attack. Cyber criminals, they go after a vendor which isn't necessarily their target, but they will be the vehicle that will take them to their target. So I think the fact that, once again, all businesses, economies, societies, and businesses, they are connected more than ever, means that even a vulnerability or a loophole in one of my partners' systems could potentially affect my business as well. So this is something that also a lot of my clients do think about, how they can protect their supply chain, how they can protect or ensure that their partners won't turn at one point in time as a threat to their business, how they will not affect their business continuity and operation negatively because they have a vulnerability which they weren't taking care of in the past. And of course, there are a lot of other challenges potentially that could change from one organization to another. As you rightly mentioned, the vertical of the industry, and each industry rather, would have different challenges than the other industries. So when we talk about, for example, healthcare, they do have a lot of common with other businesses, but definitely they have their own threat factors that they need to account for. They will be different than when we talk about industrial facility and critical infrastructure setup, or even a commercial company. The size of the company sometimes would bring different set of threats. SMBs or small businesses would have different challenges than large organization or government entities as well. So, as I said, they do have a lot of common when it comes to the maybe shared technologies and the processes and the procedures that are common among all businesses, more or less. But then you get to the point where you see that there are different challenges for different segments of the and different industries, I mean.
So there's a series of new threat environments out there, and the volume of these threats is increasing, seems to be, based on what you said, and the capacity is changing too. And it's really interesting what you said about supply lines from someone who is aware of history or has studied conventional security, in that, this has always been a way to attack the infrastructure or the capabilities of your adversary, and to see these tactics now moving into the new economy and the digital economy, and to find new ways of defending against that in a digital realm is also extremely important.
Right.
So you mentioned critical infrastructure, and one of the things the UAE Tech Podcast does is really curates a conversation on how elements of the digital economy are merging with elements of the government and citizen services. And as you know, the UAE has a lot of smart city services. It talks a lot about digitalisation and, the vision for the future. And that's things like, in automated driving or basic citizen services where you pay for your parking ticket, and, e-government, where a lot of your identity services and your family services are online. So in the immediate term, already in the UAE, a lot of the ways we interact with government are via an app or via a phone or via a digital access point.
Right.
But going forwards, the plan is for this to, really grow and expand exponentially. So many of the ways we interact with our governments to begin with are no longer physical. We're no longer going to an institution. We're interacting in cyberspace. And then, of course, there's large events like the Expo or critical infrastructure that we all increasingly are part of our lives here in the city. How does a company like Kaspersky try and think of this changing environment and try and work with stakeholders in government and the public sector to, provide them with the security and the systems that they require?
Well, John, one of the things critical things actually that we do is we depend on our vast experience, and especially in the realm of cyber threat intelligence. This is one domain that almost all entities, especially when it comes to large enterprises, government entities, critical infrastructure facilities, the cyber threat intelligence plays a very important role in not only providing the tools that these entities can use to protect and defend themselves, but also to give them the vision and the heads up of what could potentially be risky or be a threat to them in the near future or the far future. So, of course, we use our unique position globally in terms of us being able to build a very robust database of threat actors globally, track their activities and track the activities of other regional and global threat actors, and then provide this information to, first of all, we use it until we consume this information internally to try and understand the trends and where the cyber domain is heading, and then try to understand what tools and what technologies we need to start working on from today so that we're prepared for what could potentially materialize in the future. But at the same time, we do share this information, this intelligence with our clients and our partners in the region and globally, once again to give them that ability to predict what could potentially threaten their organizations and their digital assets in the future. You mentioned, for example, the Expo and a lot of other regional, maybe global even events that are yet to happen. They are in the phase of preparation and development. So it's a key element to be able to provide the intelligence, the cybersecurity intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, to help these organizations to, once again, understand not only the current threat landscape, but how this landscape could shift in the future, what threats could potentially arise in the future and become, a direct threat to their setup, a direct threat to their organization and infrastructure. We also, in that domain, work on the industrial and critical infrastructure protection, because obviously this is a very important domain to all societies, especially when you are in a country that is constantly evolving and digitizing, as you said, all the services. Many of the things that usually we don't, as citizens, we don't see is that we interact probably with the digitized government services, but there are a lot of other services which are also digitized, which we don't necessarily interact with directly, but they do affect us indirectly. So one of the things that we work on is establishing, actually we had already established the, we call it ICS CERT. So it's an incident response team that is taking care or looking after the industrial facilities globally. They track and hunt for threat actors, probably even state-sponsored threat actors that are after the industrial facilities and industrial control systems, which again could potentially cause huge damage if they were able to reach these setups. So this team within Kaspersky, their role is to monitor these threat actors, report on them, provide the intelligence to our clients, and then try to shape our solutions and our services in a manner that we are ready to encounter these threats once they materialize. We try to give our clients the heads up that we need to go in that direction, or be prepared to encounter that kind of threat, even though it may not necessarily be there right now, but there is a very good chance that it will in the near future. So this is one of the things that we do, not only on the industrial security part, but also on the commercial and government part. We do have a separate team that handles that part for us, called the Global Research and Analysis team. Their bread and butter is tracking global threat actors, especially the highly sophisticated kind of threat actors. APT, the ones behind APT attacks, targeted attacks, and again, nation-sponsored threat actors. So they track these guys, and then they generate the cyber threat intelligence and the reports that we need to provide to our clients, to be able to understand all their tactics, their techniques, their approach, what they're after, how they're evolving, and their motives, and so on. All this information and all this obviously would help us to tackle that part.
So I think, based on what you've just said, it's fair to say that modern cybersecurity is a little bit more than antivirus software.
Oh yes, it's a huge space.
But no, I mean, you've talked about intelligence there, providing human intelligence and analysis and research and analysis. You've talked about providing defense. You've also talked about offense, naturally actively going out and searching for aggressive actors. And I think that illustrates really well that there are a lot of different capabilities and a lot of different skill sets involved in a modern cybersecurity organization. So I guess one element of that that we haven't talked about is emerging technologies. You mentioned cybercrime, you mentioned how these acts were scaling and growing. But what about the idea that new technologies will actually shift the sophistication of cyber criminals? So a potential hypothetical future situation in which, basic AI bots can be launched by a malicious actor, or phishing scams become much more automated. Do you see that as a plausible future scenario? And how are companies like Kaspersky working to kind of counteract those trends?
One of the things that we can't ignore is that as we evolve and as our technologies evolve as well, cyber criminals, they do evolve as well. They do have their own ways of building their tool set, sharing their tool set. We try to track them, definitely they're tracking us, and so on. So it's a ongoing kind of game that everybody is evolving. Everybody is trying to make use of the technology to their or in their favor. One of these technologies, for example, is artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning within AI. So while we do use that nowadays in almost all the in everything we do, try to benefit from what machine learning can bring to us in terms of automating and predicting how threats could evolve or where we can spot and find those threats. Cyber criminals at the same time, they do use these same technologies to try and evade, our technologies and our detection technologies. So the thing is, it's important to try and find a let me call it a formula where we can make use of the technology, or we can employ rather the technology in a way that would help us to gain that edge over cyber criminals. We can't constantly say that we are ahead of the threat actors and everything is fine, because obviously it's a matter of who keeps that edge probably in their favor, who is able to keep employing technologies and keep developing technologies as soon as they can, obviously, to keep that advantage in their on their side. So for us, for example, at Kaspersky, we do have a large part of our R&D team. They're looking after the new innovative ways of spotting cybercrime, spotting threat actors, and then hunt for their traces and go after them and try to eliminate any risks, protect our clients, and so on. Of course, one of these technologies is the machine learning, and as I mentioned, it's already embedded in almost all what we do at the moment. We use it in different ways and in different scenarios, in different solutions, so that it gives us the results, and our customers as well, the results they would expect from such a solution, to help to understand the patterns, the behavior, the probably what the normal picture of a certain environment would look like in some sense, and then try to see if there is any deviation from that normal pattern. And obviously, with the huge amount of data and a huge amount of devices and tools that companies are using, it's very challenging to have a human expert or even a team of human experts who can track and spot these deviations. You would need to have the technology on your side to help you to spot and track and hunt for these traces. And this is exactly what machine learning, for example, is doing for us. We use it to identify these deviations from the what we would call normal patterns, for example, and then based on that we react. We set how we should react and interact with these deviation and changes, and then try to eliminate the risk altogether.
That's so interesting, and of course it makes sense, for prediction and pattern matching purposes. The amount of data that's being produced every day can only really be, scanned at the surface level by a machine. And I think what is also relevant there is that increasingly, as we've discussed, as governments become digitalized and key services become digitalized, it's the same again, elements of AI and machine learning become incorporated into some of the digital infrastructure of how our societies work. One thing I wasn't aware of, actually, is we had a previous episode with the Dubai Financial Services Authority, and they were saying, we have some entrepreneurs coming to us with really exciting products, but one of the first things you have to ask in our industry is, what about security? What about cybersecurity? What are your vulnerabilities? And that's a really big change, because I was an entrepreneur 5-6 years ago. Can you imagine going into a pitch meeting and being asked, well, what are your security capabilities? I think the answer would have been, hey, I'm at my seed stage, give me a break. Yeah. But now that's changing, and it's something that, but obviously the fintech is a very specific industry, but I think that's increasingly appearing in other industries too that are less obvious. Has that been something that you've seen as well, just this conversation kind of becoming much wider?
Of course, because even you mentioned the IFSC and the questions and the requirements they ask from these new companies. Now, even the larger and already established companies in many places, even in Dubai here, they have to comply with certain regulations and requirements. And one of these nowadays is the cybersecurity. So almost every industry nowadays, they do have certain cybersecurity requirements and regulations that they have to comply with. Otherwise, they will be vulnerable to cyber threats, and consequently, they will bring risks to the societies and their clients and customers as well. And obviously, the more critical that industry is, the higher the emphasis on the importance of cybersecurity. And obviously, because all industries now going towards, as we said at the beginning, they're going toward digitization and incorporating technology deeper and deeper into their business processes. That means any intrusion into these technologies and the tools they have in place definitely would mean a negative impact on the business continuity and business processes, and a lot of other negative outcomes. So the more critical the industry is, definitely the higher what's on stake, and consequently they need to comply with regulations and laws, so that they ensure to the best of their ability that they are minimizing the attack surface. We call it the attack surface, their threat profile, and the risks that potentially they could encounter.
Yeah, so I think we've discussed the attack surface in that episode, and it's indicative in a way of how the language is also changing when you discuss digital on some of these platforms now, that increasingly this language from the cybersecurity industry is beginning to appear in other industries. So I suppose on that note, Emad, what about the future for Kaspersky in the region, and the future challenges and opportunities for cybersecurity more generally in 2021? How do you see the next 12 months ahead?
Well, definitely the main challenges we see are coming from the advancement in certain technologies around us, one of which is the 5G for sure. This is a big topic that's all over the place right now, and because it's a new technology, it brings with it a new set of threats. For example, we'll have more and more, obviously, devices connected to the 5G network. That means not only the regular, we're familiar with smart devices will be online, but even sensors and controllers and smaller devices will be connected or could be connected to the 5G network. That means they are exposed to the threats and the risks on the internet, and definitely we would need to have a way to try and protect these devices or even equipment and sensors. So the idea is that any new technology, we would need to understand the technology first of all, and then understand what threats this technology brings with it. 5G is just an example, but then there are challenges with blockchain, for example, how to secure blockchain implementation, how to even sometimes you will get into the ethics part of it, like implementation of machine learning, for example, and how you guarantee that machine learning is actually working in the way it's supposed to be working in. So all these technologies, I mean, we see them around us more and more as time evolves. Probably 5G is the closest thing to almost everyone nowadays. So all these technologies, unfortunately, will bring with them their own risks. And this is one of the things that we are trying, I mean, at Kaspersky, we're trying to work on, to try and understand how we can, predict these threats ahead of time and then work from now on creating the environment and providing the environment that could allow to harvest the benefit of these technologies while operating in a safe environment. One thing that we are working on and keep developing is our own operating system, Kaspersky OS. This is a operating system that's created from scratch. It's not based on any other previous implementation. And it's not of course, the typical operating system you would expect to have on your desktop. We created this operating system specifically for IoT devices, connected cars, for industrial control systems. It allows these critical devices to operate in a secure environment. And it at the microkernel level, it doesn't allow processes and applications, anything running on the operating system, to interact with each other unless the interaction path and interaction plan was there already. So it guarantees the security and the protection of these devices, especially when you think of IoT, because one of the challenges with IoT devices is that these are devices that are low on resources. So it's not the kind of device that you can throw in a security product that will protect the device. These devices has to come with security built into them. We can't just implement security there. So this was one of the drivers why we came up with our operating system, to set up that environment ahead of time for these devices and allow them to operate in a, let me say, naturally protected environment. So we don't have to worry about intrusions or processes being, spying on each other or having anything malicious deployed or reach these devices.
Well, thank you for that note on Kaspersky OS, and that is extremely interesting given a previous episode we had with a guy called Sanmeet Kochar, who represents one of the largest 5G telecoms providers in the region. And a lot of that discussion was about how 4G really changed fundamental aspects of the US economy and the world economy. And the next iteration of that was 5G. And a lot of the discussion was, these are the trends, but there really will be new horizon technologies in the next 5 years utilized by 5G that at the moment we haven't predicted. But IoT will almost definitely, without a doubt, be one of those. And as you said, there's a real issue from Hollywood movies to public awareness of hacking these systems very easily, mm-hmm. or interfering in people's everyday everyday lives. So that concept of having a specific OS to provide a security and to track this is really interesting, and it's also quite obvious. But it's not something that has been discussed in the past. And of course, we all use OS every day, every time we go on our phones, every time we turn on a computer. So it's also a sign of how things are changing. And I think IoT and AI and 5G are all fascinating case studies. The blockchain is also very interesting, though. So one of our first episodes was with a guy called John McAfee, who, of course, has a background in cybersecurity. And we were sort of playing devil's advocate, but his argument was the blockchain is the future technology. Everything else is irrelevant. And the idea of this technology is it is trustless. Why is there a need for cybersecurity when you have a decentralized ledger in which every transaction is visible and there is no way of changing the ledger? And so he said, this changes the fundamental logic of our economy and of cyberspace and of how many of our financial systems work. Now, of course, we were pushing back a bit against this, and we were saying, if you look through history, there's never been a perfect system, ever. We've often hoped for one, but it's never came. There's always been vulnerabilities. And it was a really interesting debate, because on the one hand, you had the blockchain evangelist who was saying, this is the future, and obviously he's a well-known person. He has a bit of authority. And then we've spoken to other people in the industry who are saying, blockchain is very, very exciting, but again, there are different verticals, there are different applications, and there are certainly issues to discuss there. What's your take on this whole debate?
I mean, I would agree with you that there isn't a 100%. We wish to have that 100% secure system, but the fact of the matter that there isn't a completely secure and immune system as a whole. Now, probably we have to take that idea or expand that idea to a more broader context and look at sometimes the hosting environment of the system. So there is a chance that when, I'm not necessarily talking about blockchain now here, but there's a chance that when you operate a system that's supposed to be secure, it might be secure in one aspect, but the hosting environment isn't secure. Even the physical surroundings of it isn't secure enough, so it doesn't eventually lead to a completely 100% secure system. Blockchain, for example, depends, as you know, in certain parts on the smart contract concept, and in there you could find a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of mistakes, which not necessarily have to be the typical kind of vulnerabilities that we think of. It could be a vulnerability in the process, a vulnerability in the logic, a vulnerability in the way that a system is working, and then that vulnerability at a certain point in time allow someone to take advantage of it, to exploit that vulnerability, and then probably change the way the system should operate. Obviously, the effect of that could be different from one system to another. It doesn't have to have the same results on every system in every instance. But definitely, we can look at cybersecurity from a much broader perspective. And I think for the future we should, because it's not only the fact that the software is secure, the hardware is secure, and that's it. We need to think of the processes. We need to think of the logic that drives the software on top of that hardware. We need to think of even the environment where the system is operational, because all that would definitely have an impact on the overall security of the system. Potentially certain part of it you can't reach, you can't modify, etc. But that doesn't mean that you cannot somehow modify the way it operates. I mean, I did mention the ethics part of machine learning, for example. One of the things that people debate about is that how accurate machine learning could be in predicting certain patterns and so on. But there is always an element of risk that the machine learning could be trained on a misleading data set. That means its decision, its logic is illogical, So that not necessarily a vulnerability in the system itself, but it was a vulnerability in the way it was implemented, made it weak, and then the results weren't the expected or sought after results. This potentially could affect any other technology. The way it's implemented, the way it's developed and put together, if there is any kind of mistakes in it, it could potentially lead to a bigger threat in the future, which again we may not see today.
Yeah, it's impressive that Kaspersky is talking about the ethics of the data sets and training machine learning on data sets, and how appropriate is a specific data set for pattern matching and pattern identification. And of course, there's also a wider debate on the internet about what is the appropriate balance between internet freedom and the freedom to interact how you want on the internet, and then obviously legitimate concerns about the security of your activity, your privacy, your data, and in a way, malicious actors in cyberspace create that policy discussion for everyone. Because on the one hand, as I think we discussed earlier, you want your kids to be able to play safely and to enjoy, an open, safe environment. On the other hand, you want to take precautions to ensure that's possible. So I think one of the interesting things about this discussion today is it hasn't just focused on economics and technology. We've also talked about wider social and ethical issues that I think might also be part of the conversation going forwards here in the region and of course globally. So with that in mind, what are your key hopes for your sector over the next few months here in the UAE and the region? What are the things that you're really excited about?
Well, we're obviously, it's a very good or great rather opportunity to be in this part of the world, part that is constantly evolving. We have the chance to deal and work with the largest organization and a lot of the consumer even at the same time. But it's a very exciting to be in such a competitive, challenging environment, because that's obviously would push us to bring the best out in us. And Kaspersky as a whole, globally, we are constantly trying to come up with innovative solutions and try to be ahead of threats to the best we can. And definitely this will help us to maintain our interaction and dialogue and our relation with our partners and our clients regionally and globally.
Emad Haffar, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for joining the UAE Tech Podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, John.
For more information on cybersecurity solutions in the UAE, be sure to check out Kaspersky's very own automated awareness platform at asap.kaspersky.com. That's asap.kaspersky.com. That offers training created by leading cybersecurity experts to help protect small enterprises who cannot withstand the blow of a cyber attack. Also remember that Kaspersky is offering listeners a discount using the promo code ALBAWEBA, which can be used on any of Kaspersky's consumer products on kas.pr/ALBAWEBA. One more time, that's kas.pr/ALBAWEBA. You can also follow Kaspersky on social media at Kaspersky.